Hello and welcome. My name is Peter Engelke, and I am the Deputy Director of Foresight at the Scowcroft Center and a non-resident fellow at the Global Energy Center here at the Atlantic Council. On behalf of the Atlantic Council and BP, I am pleased to welcome all of you to today's event, A Model for Decarbonizing Cities. We are, of course, thrilled to be releasing two issue briefs today featuring port cities that are leading in decarbonization efforts around the world. Both of these were written by my colleague, Joseph Webster, and myself. Joe is a senior fellow here at the Global Energy Center. We wrote these papers featuring Valencia, Spain, and Rotterdam, the Netherlands, and the reports can be downloaded by visiting the event webpage. We are joined today by representatives from port cities and regions from around the world, including Valencia and Rotterdam, but also a number of others, including Houston, Aberdeen, and Chile. Port cities, as I'm sure all of you know, are central nodes in global supply chains with robust industrial and commercial portfolios. Hence, their decarbonization efforts have significant impact, not just on those regions, but on the world in general. So our discussion today will review policies and initiatives that have been instrumental to their successes and identify key challenges and opportunities for those cities as well, and hopefully draw some lessons for cities, including but not limited to port cities and regions elsewhere in the world. Our discussion will attempt to draw out some potential lessons for other port cities that also are seeking to pursue effective decarbonization pathways while achieving societal buy-in and, of course, maintaining or even augmenting their economic bases and their economic activities. Before we begin with this discussion today, I do have a few small housekeeping notes to get out of the way. This event is public and on the record. We are live streaming via Zoom, as well as on Twitter and YouTube. We encourage all of you to post about today's discussion and share on social media using the hashtag AC Energy and tagging us at AC Global Energy. Those who are watching via Zoom can submit questions through the Q&A function located at the bottom of your Zoom screen. I, as moderator today, will try to weave your questions into the discussion. Our panelists are also encouraged to respond to these questions directly. Without further ado, it is my pleasure to begin today's program, and it is an even greater pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker, Andre Guevara, President of BP Spain. Andre, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Peter, and thank you to the Atlantic Council for inviting me to join today's event. Just over 3 years ago, BP announced its ambition to become a net zero company by 2050 or sooner and help the world get to net zero. That has triggered a massive transformation of the company, as you can imagine, given the scale of that ambition. One of the aims supporting that ambition is to help cities and corporations decarbonize. I think the case for this aim and ambition was very clear. You know, cities account for more than 70% of global emissions. They are areas where demand for energy is very concentrated. They are ecosystems where over half of the world population lives, and they seem to continue to grow. The transport networks, ports and airports, and industrial zones close to cities are places where there's significant demand for energy. And obviously this offers a great opportunity to make a big impact when it comes to emissions and abating them. So that is why at BP, we started approaching cities to explore how we can help them on their decarbonization paths. We focused on well-known industry and energy centers, cities and regions where we have long-standing relationships, significant employee bases, and close ties to their communities. So Aberdeen in the UK, Houston in the US, the region of Valencia in Spain, where we have a refinery in the city of Castellón, and Rotterdam in the Netherlands. Our belief is that only by working together we can understand the opportunities and challenges, and obviously find solutions to get to net zero. In other words, collaboration is absolutely fundamental because the challenge is humongous and not an easy one to solve. I want to take this opportunity to share 3 of the lessons that we've learned so far. There are many, but we're distilling 3 that we've learned from these engagements and the projects that have emerged. The first one is that the energy and mobility assets that cities often control can enable change to the whole economy. Secondly, that we need to work with the city, but also within the city. And third, and most important, that integration is key to developing commercially sustainable energy systems that are also decarbonized. Let me go one by one. Through our work with Aberdeen City Council, we've learned that decarbonizing city-owned energy and mobility assets has the potential to drive change for the whole economy of the city and its surroundings. For those who don't know, Aberdeen manages a portfolio of homes and buildings owned by the City Council, operates one of the largest district heating systems in the UK, and has a fleet of municipal vehicles that includes buses, waste collection, and so on. It is also home to some of the UK's most prolific offshore wind resources and a deep water port. By working with partners like BP and Aberdeen to deliver scalable hydrogen production and distribution facilities, the city can switch from diesel to hydrogen for its buses and create zero carbon zones and enable a green port. This in turn can attract new industries like offshore wind, which as we know is being developed, and we're also participating in that, and help develop clean technologies and skilled jobs to ensure there's a transition from oil and gas to the green economy. So while transitioning away from its oil and gas industry, the city's decarbonization plans can help stimulate a new hydrogen economy and ensure that the city has a vibrant future as it has had a vibrant past. The other example is Houston. So we've been working with Houston, and it's a great example of where we've learned that we can work with regional and city authorities as potential customers, but also can work with other private sector players within the city. In the US, BP is working with Hertz to bring fast EV charging to more than a dozen cities in the country, including Houston. And a company like Hertz wants to electrify its fleet and provide its customers with access to fast EV chargers, but it needs certainty that charging infrastructure will be available. For BP, knowing that the demand for EV charging enables investment, knowing that demand enables investment in charging bays or charging points. And at the same time, cities and governments can play a role as an enabler through policy and through encouraging cooperation between sectors and company, and very specifically by providing land that sometimes is the bottleneck for EV charging deployment. So it's a great example how demand and supply can come together to break the cycle that we see as one of the challenges of the energy transition. And again, the city can play a role of enabling all that to happen. Finally, we've learned that by bringing together the demand for low carbon energy from cities, transport hubs, and industry, we can enable investments to provide cost competitive low carbon energy at scale. And this is why BP is planning to develop integrated energy hubs around our refineries in the region of Valencia and Rotterdam. So for example, in February this year, we launched plans for HyVal. HyVal is the hydrogen cluster for the Valencia region, and it's being developed at our Castellón refinery. This aims to become a green hydrogen cluster that will enable decarbonization, not only of the refinery, but also the entire region. The goals are ambitious. but I think it's the right thing. We are aiming to develop up to 2 gigawatts of electrolysis capacity by 2030 for green hydrogen production, which we will initially use to decarbonize our refinery operations, as refineries in general tend to be consumers of hydrogen as part of the refining process. We also plan to use green hydrogen to produce biofuels, helping decarbonize tourism industry through sustainable aviation fuel. And that's very relevant for a country and a region like Spain and Valencia, where tourism is so important. The linkage there with hydrogen is that hydrogen, and green hydrogen in particular, is a feedstock for biofuel production. But it doesn't stop there. The green hydrogen can also be used in hard-to-abate industries in the Valencia region. For example, the ceramic industry is very material in the region, and replacing the natural gas used in their process for other fuels like green hydrogen to reach the temperatures needed is something we are very much focused on in collaboration with the ceramic sector. In the chemical industry, a derivative of green hydrogen, such as green ammonia, can be used to replace gray ammonia for green one. And this can also be used as a marine fuel for the busiest port in the Mediterranean, which is the port of Valencia. And eventually, it can be exported to customers in the north of Europe, either via pipeline or as a liquid carrier in the form of ammonia. So many examples ongoing. Our learning continues. I think one thing is for sure to us, that no one can do this alone. Collaboration is fundamental. And by working together, combining our expertise across sectors and companies, we can get to net zero faster. I'm really grateful to the Atlantic Council for convening these important conversations that we're having here today or about to start. And I really hope you enjoyed today's event. So thank you so much. And over to you, Peter.
All right, thank you so much, Andre. So let's begin with the first of our two panels. The first today will focus on the two cities that Joe and I wrote about in our papers, Valencia and Rotterdam, and specifically on their decarbonization efforts over the past several years. I will be joined here in a moment by several people from those two cities and regions. Mark Dijk, who is Manager External Affairs at the Port of Rotterdam, Gilles Odeman, who is the Director for Scientific Solutions and External Partnerships at the City of Rotterdam, Raul Cascayo, who is Head of Environmental Policies at the Port Authority of Valencia, and Deborah Domingo, who is Vice Rector, Sustainable Development of Campus at the Polytechnic University of Valencia. So again, to everyone during the panels, please do not forget to add questions in the Q&A box, and I'll try to weave as many as I can into the discussion. And panelists, of course, are also, as I said before, welcome to answer the questions directly. So why don't we go ahead and get started? So I think I'd like to direct my first set of questions to our friends from Rotterdam. And specifically, Gilles, if I might ask a question to you first, or maybe two questions to you first. We had a question in the chat about civil society, and in my mind, that speaks to the question which is front and center when we're talking about cities and the decarbonization efforts of cities, which is to involve stakeholders in decarbonization efforts and processes. So I'm curious if we might begin with a question for you, Gilles, about how the city of Rotterdam has worked with stakeholders from other parts of the government in the Netherlands, with the port itself, of course, and with other stakeholders, including private sector and civil society, over the past several years on decarbonization efforts. How has the city actually brought these stakeholders together? If you could just quickly review that for us.
Thank you, Peter. It's a delight to be here. In answering your question, a couple of years ago, we made a climate agreement in which we brought together all kinds of stakeholders in around the city of Rotterdam, in around the port, but also the city itself. And after concluding that agreement, we made some climate deals with all of those partners. So we are very actively engaged to reach out to all kinds of stakeholders to join us in our efforts to decarbonize our city in making climate deals.
So my understanding is that process took a number of was an intensive process. It took a number of months, maybe even years to complete. But so thus far the results are promising. In other words, that the stakeholders who have engaged the city and with other actors so far has been promising. And if based on the conversations that we've had with folks in Rotterdam, is that your view as well so far?
It is. I am very optimistic about it. So all kinds of people, all kinds of stakeholders share our common goal to decarbonize city and port. Mm-hmm. So it's one of the few things in which everybody agrees in Rotterdam. The need to decarbonize the city, the need to decarbonize the port. From left center parties to right parties to populist parties, everybody agrees about the need to decarbonize our city and port.
Wonderful. And so from the city's perspective, you're a representative of the city. What are the main emphases that the city is focusing on in terms of decarbonization? What are the big decarbonization efforts that the city is trying to engage in, whether it's with the port and with other actors, as you are working on this journey towards decarbonization?
First of all, as you just mentioned the port, I think Mark can elaborate on that one a bit. Yes. Secondly, mobility is a huge contribution in the Netherlands to decarbonize. So that's why we are stimulating everybody to have electric vehicles. So we try to decarbonize mobility. Thirdly is houses. In the Netherlands, we are currently a lot of houses are on natural gas. And we're trying to subsidiate that with the heat from the port. So those are the main three areas.
Wonderful. Why don't we turn then to questions about the port? So, and turning to Mark, we all know, I think that the port. I think most of the folks here on this call, at least, will know that the port of Rotterdam is one of the most important ports in Europe and the world in terms of volume of shipping, in terms of volume of hydrocarbons that go through the port. And so as a result, the port itself is one of the most important actors in not just in Rotterdam, not just in the Netherlands, but in all of Europe in terms of leading on decarbonization. So given that, what is the port strategy for decarbonization? What are you all doing? If you could summarize your efforts for the people on this at this event.
Thank you, Peter, for that very limited question that you were asking, how we should decarbonize our port. And thank you also for the introduction by Gilles. And I think I fully support it, is that it's so important that we also get this whole support from the city and all the stakeholders for all the efforts that we are doing. The port itself, as you said, it's a large industrial cluster. It's also a logistical hub. And indeed, we are not in the top 10 anymore of big ports, but we are 11th. So still quite an important port, but also very important for the Rotterdam area, because we are still responsible for some 100,000 jobs directly. And if you add it up, then you come to around 360 jobs indirectly also in the Rotterdam Rijnmond area. So also for the socio-economic part of the port, it is important that the port remains important also in the long term. And when you realize then that this whole industrial cluster is also responsible for around 14% of all the CO2 emissions of the whole of the Netherlands, then you know that we've got a big responsibility. And they can do two things. One of them is close down everything, and then the decarbonization is finished. But then it has an impact on the social economic side. So then it will lose 360,000 jobs. So our challenge is of course, first of all, to from our responsibility, also societal responsibility, to decarbonize these 14% of the CO2 emissions in the Netherlands. But on the other side, also to remain important and innovative, that we still can keep these jobs and these 3,000 companies in the port flourishing for the added value and the benefits of the Rotterdam, but also actually for the whole country of the Netherlands. And therefore we follow an end-to-end strategy, and we want to attract new businesses who are working more circular, and at the same time we want to support all the companies in their defossiling actually their businesses. So trying to change over the whole energy system, and then the same as our chairman from Valencia from BP already said, focusing then on hydrogen, both for the production of hydrogen and for the import of hydrogen, and then also facilitate this to the hinterland, so that all the companies, both in the Rotterdam Rijnmond area, but also in the Netherlands, but also in Germany, can benefit from the skill of our port, also in this energy transition. So we're focusing on efficiency, that's with the CCS, carbon capture and storage, but also using heat, as Gilles was also mentioning, using residual heat for residential heating. Secondly, it's changing the energy system, focusing on hydrogen, facilitating offshore energy for hydrogen production, but also for import terminals for importing hydrogen. Third one is circular and to change over the raw materials system. And the fourth one of our strategy is changing the fossil-based transport in a more sustainable fuels being used. So that's from my side, the first kickoff, Peter.
Thank you, Mark. So maybe a question for both of you, and I'm happy to have either one of you or both of you weigh in your call. But when we were when Joe and I and Maya were in Rotterdam a few months ago, we had a conversation wherein we talked a bit about some of the remaining challenges for Rotterdam, both the port and the city. And one of the things that was raised was the possibility that either international events, for example, the war in Ukraine, or domestic politics, or both, might begin to impact this trajectory that Rotterdam is on, this positive trajectory. And so one of course, the most recent events that's gotten in the news lately is the emergence of the Farmer Citizen Movement Party in the Netherlands, which recently won some elections for the Senate in the Netherlands. And one of their planks is sort of opposition to some of the environmental policies in the country, including, I believe, and especially a focus on nitrogen emissions. So I guess the question for either of you, you don't necessarily have to address that particular movement, but the question is, how do you see the biggest challenges, either one or both of you, for this, for maintaining, sustaining this trajectory, this decarbonization trajectory for both the port and the city as we move forward?
So, Gilles, do you want to start?
Fine, Mark, thank you. First of all, it's a remarkable thing about this triple B movement, BBB, Boer-Burgerbeweging in good Dutch. And I will talk about the consequences afterwards. Two remarkable features. First of all, Rotterdam was the cradle, the breeding ground of the populist movement about 20 years ago. And since populist parties have always had an electoral score about 30%, and sometimes even higher, about 40. But in the most recent elections, the Greens have won the elections in Rotterdam for the first time. And most remarkable, almost all cities over 100,000 inhabitants in the Netherlands have voted the Greens a number one. And all cities under 100,000 inhabitants have voted triple B. So there's a huge divide, a growing divide between the larger cities in the Netherlands, which are relatively modest in the American standards, But nevertheless, the gap is huge. And please remind the Netherlands is not much bigger than Rhode Island. So in a tiny country, there's huge differences between bigger cities and the rest of the country. And Rotterdam is not anymore the front runner in the populist movement. Secondly, the reasons why people have voted Triple B vary a lot. For instance, after the elections, there was an opinion poll why people had voted for Triple B. It had little to do with farmers, but a lot to do with the inept government, as people said. So there are a lot of reasons why people have voted for Triple B. I think the consequences are pretty great, and not so much on the decarbonization, which is, I think, supported by this Triple B movement, which is not a big issue for them, but nitrogen is. And please keep in mind that we in the Netherlands are the #2 exporter of agricultural products of the United States. Such a tiny country is #2 exporter, which only represents 1.4% of our gross national product. So, and as you may have heard, this nitrogen crisis has created a paralysis of the Netherlands. So we cannot build a house anymore. We have to do something about the farmers. Industry is locked up, and I think one of the big dangers of the current political situation is the Triple B movement will ensure that farmers will be good. So nitrogen won't hit them as hard as maybe might be necessary. Secondly, I think we have a huge housing crisis. So most political parties will ensure that also the building of houses will continue. And I'm afraid that industry might be a big loser of these elections. But I'm very curious about the view of Mark on this one.
Thank you for your political analysis also on this this big change in the Netherlands. I think it also shows important that we also have to include all our stakeholders and all the citizens of the Netherlands with the necessity of this energy transition, because it's not a choice if, it's just a choice how and for how fast we are doing it. And I think that is the important part of it. But if we're talking about also the geopolitical challenges, yes, Peter, then there is an enormous challenge also from what we face here in the Netherlands. Because in your article, we showed also that the CO2 emissions were going down the last 5-6 years, but that was mainly because of the closing down of coal-fired power plants. However, due to the new situation, we have to increase, of course, the coal-fired power plants. So for the CO2, that will have a different impact. But hopefully that will be only temporary. And then with the changeover also to a more nitrogen-based energy economy, we can minimize it. But next to the political support, there are other challenges also that we are facing as a port, next to also the geopolitical challenges. And first of all is space. You see that the hydrogen has a lower energy intensity than oil. And since we are doing a support, also 13% of all the energy from the EU is going through the port of Rotterdam. You understand that if we want to change that overall to hydrogen, then that will demand a lot of space also for storage. Another important point is the timing. BP, for instance, in our port is very much ready with all kinds of projects to launch, building electrolyzers, connecting also to the CCS network, the carbon capture and storage network. But we have to wait till the government has made their decisions. And this timing is, of course, important if we want to be also in time meeting all the targets that we set also for 2030, minus 55% of all the 1990 CO2 levels. Regulations remain unclear. That's an important point. I think that other companies and ports will also confirm that it's still a challenge. For instance, it's still difficult to import green hydrogen in Europe. Well, we all know that we need it. Human capital is an important problem in the Netherlands. There's an unemployment rate of 2.5 or 3%. So if you also want to have people who are building the technique of the new green economy, we need to get a lot of new employees from inside or outside the Netherlands. And finally, I think that Gilles already mentioned it. Nitrogen is the showstopper at the moment, because the nitrogen emissions, which are much too high in the Netherlands according to the European levels, have to go down. First of all, because the nature has been damaged, and so much nature we don't have anymore in the Netherlands. It's the size of Rhode Island with 80 million people, and I think the 16th economy in the world. But that also prohibits actually building. So we can't build any project. And currently we have in the port of Rotterdam only already for 8 billion on investments which are waiting until the nitrogen problem is being solved, until we can start building. So that is really a problem being faced. And to start again with the first part of your question, Peter, and what Gilles was already elaborating about, is that is really becoming a political problem now, which is going to be harder. So thank you for that question.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Mark and Gilles. Let's now bring in our colleagues from Valencia and Raul and Deborah. And Deborah, I might begin with a question to you about the actions that the city of Valencia and other stakeholders, the private sector, civil society, academia, all have taken to advance a decarbonization agenda in Valencia, the city, and the region. So, for example, what kinds of policies and investments have been done in transport? For mode switching is a big theme in Valencia, meaning moving people from automobiles to public transit, to walking and bicycling, or maybe in building efficiency and renewable energy. And I'm curious if you just might give us an overview of sort of where Valencia has gone over the past several years.
Well, thank you very much, Peter, for the opportunity to tell you all about what Valencia has been doing in the last years. In fact, the way I believe the town council has decided to understand decarbonization, it's an holistic way, it's a transversal way, and they are considering, I would say, like quantitative but also qualitative effects of this decarbonization. So for the city, it has been very, very important to work on mobility, on energy efficiency of buildings or renewables, and of course on the green infrastructure, what we call the green infrastructure. And what has been taken into consideration is not only the impact in numbers that these 4 pillars of decarbonization have on the total amount, but also about the quality of life for the inhabitants. It must be said also that, managing a city, it has nothing to do with managing a port. We are talking about inhabitants on the one hand, and we are talking about industrial and commercial activities on the other hand. So I believe that this, more friendly way of approaching the topic, it's easier in the case of cities. So in Valencia, we have been moved to a shift in mobility. That's something that you can notice, you are feeling if you visit Valencia like 5 years ago and you visit nowadays the city. We have been, I would say, even pushed to take our bikes to move. And this has to do also with the urban morphology of the city. It's a very dense city, only 5 kilometers radius, so you can walk it. You can go everywhere on by bike and walking. This is something that our friends from the Netherlands understood in the 70s. First thing to do perhaps was about taking off cars from the streets, but we were late on that, and this has changed. What are the consequences of investing on that is that we have reduced a lot of emissions in mobility in the city, but we also need to be supported by a bigger, or I would say a more intense network of public transportation. So, and this has also a consequence in quality life, and I would say the day life in the inhabitants, that has to do with increasing the levels of safety and, reducing the noise, et cetera, that makes the city, more healthier, more friendly, etc. And the other big, I would say, topic that has been addressed is the energy efficiency and the renewables energy that comes from the sunshine, of course, here in Spain. And the city has created particular offices to address a lot of funding, I would say, then aids and support grants to the neighbors to encourage them to make self installations for photovoltaics and to increase the quality of their facades and roofs. So they are just trying to reduce consumption energy, and after reducing them, shifting them, of course, to a new model. And all this has also been done, taking into consideration, like a perfect balance, I would say almost utopian, between the local, the global, the traditional, the new. And this is what you more or less feel when you read the report for the Green Capital City that has been awarded for 2024 and in Valencia, or the climatic mission of Europe, that Valencia has been one of the 100 selected cities for these missions. So this is more or less like a big picture of what would be to visit Valencia and to look at the decarbonization program nowadays. Thank you.
Thank you, Deborah, and thank you for emphasizing that cities are almost living organisms, right? That they involve so many different stakeholders, including, and very critically, millions of people, right? Hundreds of thousands or millions of people, depending on the size of the city. And so I want to ask you one quick follow-up before I turn to Raul and ask about the Port of Valencia. But you said something, a quite lovely phrase, and I want to make sure I understood and our viewers understand it. You said that decarbonization is, at least I think this is what you said, decarbonization is easier in the case of cities. And I'm wondering what you meant by that. I think I know what you mean by that, but maybe you could articulate quickly for us what that means in your mind.
I believe it's easier because you can touch at several keys and you can balance them. When we are addressing such an important activity as the industrial activity in ports or commercial activities that are very intense, and you cannot degrowth, as has been said before. You cannot put people back to their homes, and you have employees, you have an economy to maintain. This is a very, very big challenge, and you cannot, play with so many tools, I would say. If with a city, you have a lot of things you can do, and you have like direct policies you can implement, and you will have like indirect, and you will also play with emotion of people. So in this sense, for example, making people think they are responsible or they are conscious about what they're doing is easy because everyone will play together and will add. So, for example, it's not such an important thing if someone takes his car or her car to go to commute to work, but a lot of them will at the end add a lot of reduction of emissions, and this is a sort of contagious, I would say, feeling. So if we all play together, if we all reduce our consumption, we all use our mobility tools in another way, we will end up by being successful in that. And that's why I think it's easier, because you play with the emotions, not only with the numbers. That's my point of view, of course.
Wonderful. Okay, so well stated. Thank you so much, Deborah. And Raul, let's now discuss a little bit about the Port of Valencia. Of course, as is true with Rotterdam, the Valencia's port is one of the largest in Europe, and certainly one of the largest in the Mediterranean. love to hear from you, just as we did from the Port of Rotterdam, what the Port Authority in Valencia is doing now, what it has been doing to facilitate the decarbonization efforts at the port, and of course, in the context of Valencia and writ large. So please, Raul, go ahead.
Thank you, Peter. Well, our strategy in terms of the decarbonization started just in the last century. So we started very early, and in 2012 there was an award from IAPH given to the Port of Valencia because of the development of the Climate project, which was one of the first projects related to the climate change. So starting from that, we have learned from some research made by the European Union that 14% of the emissions of logistics come from the maritime transport. If we consider what is the relevance of the ports in terms of emissions, is roughly between 1 and 2% of the total emissions. So it means that our scope of performance is very limited. As Mark said, we are subject to a lot of externalities that affect our activities. But apart from that, we do as much as we can do. We cooperate a lot with the city hall. We cooperate a lot with the region. We cooperate a lot with all the industries. And in the port, what we do is we try to be the engagement tool to get all the companies that play their activities in the port to reach the emission targets reduction. Okay, so what we do, we have set our net zero emissions plan in 2030. We want to be emission neutral in 2030 in the ports of Valencia, Sagunto, and Gandia. How will we do that? Very simple, engaging the companies in the port, not only the ones that are stuck in the port and they play their activities here, but also the ship owners, which is more difficult to engage these companies to participate into the initiatives pushed by the Port Authority. So we have 4 pillars for the decarbonization. One of them is the renewable energy implementation. As Deborah said, sunshine is something that we have as a punishment here in Valencia, and we get advantage of that. We are now building a lot of facilities for taking advantage of this sunshine. Also, wind energy, and the other pillar is the implementation of what we call the electrification of the piers, which is the known as onshore power supply. We are still starting with that because the regulations are not very clear, the standards are not very clear, and as again I make reference to Mark, it is difficult to play with in a field where the rules are not clear yet. So we try our best, and we want to meet with the aims of the Fit for 55 package of Europe to be ready for 2030 to give power to 90% of the passenger container ships and ferry vessels. The third pillar is the digitalization. We think that the digitalization is a must in the ports because we are now turning into it's not that we are a hub as energy passing by from place A to place B, but we will generate power, and we generate power with our investments, and we need to be clear that we will use the energy for it is worth. So we don't need to we need this the fourth pillar, which is linked to this third pillar, is the energy efficiency. So if we implement a lot of measures of energy efficiency in the port, that measures should be linked to the digitalization and the control and the measurement and everything. So this is a strategy that we are implemented. We are also upgrading our facilities, because of course it's not easy to welcome vessels and say, okay, how many power do you need? 16 megawatts. Okay, here you have it. No, we don't have that. So the thing is that we need to invest a lot of money in an upgrade of the infrastructures. So by the end of the day, what we have to do is we are ready to go together with the port community in the port, and we are step by step trying to the example is there. We have reduced our carbon footprint in 10 years, 30%. So with these initiatives that we are running right now, I think we will be ready to meet the challenges for 2030.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Raul. Unfortunately, we've got to move on to the second panel, which is too bad. We'd love to have a longer conversation with representatives from both cities, but unfortunately, at least right now, we can't do that. I would like to thank, however, Mark, Gillis, Raul, and Deborah, all of you, so much for joining and for your assistance during the research phase for the Atlantic Council that we did over the past several months. I'd like now to turn to our second set of panelists to discuss decarbonization efforts in other port cities around the world, and of course to discuss any synergies with the experiences of Valencia and Rotterdam. And it's my pleasure to introduce the panelists for this next session, which include Johan Svensson, who is the program manager for Maersk McKinney Muller, its Center for Zero Carbon Shipping. Sophia Cunningham, who is the senior director at the Houston Energy Transition Initiative, Greater Houston Partnerships, and Bob Sanguinetti, who is the CEO of the Port of Aberdeen in Scotland. So once again, to all of you watching, please do not forget to add your questions in the Q&A box, and I will try to weave them into the discussion as best I can. And of course, the panelists are also welcome to answer the questions directly in the chat. So we have representatives from three different parts of the world to shed some light on this conversation and to hear from them a little bit more about what they're also up to. And let me turn first, I think maybe to Sophia. Maybe we can start with you and with your experiences in Houston. You work for something called the Houston Energy Transition Initiative. I'm wondering if you might describe the work that it does, that you do, with the city of Houston, with the port of Houston, and with other stakeholders, other levels of government, with private sector actors, with civil society, with the citizens of Houston, to implement climate action plans focused on decarbonization.
Thanks, Peter. Many thanks to you and the Atlantic Council and BP for having me today. Great to be with you all, which is in the morning in Houston right now. But thank you for the kind introduction. Happy to talk about the Houston Energy Transition Initiative. So the Houston Energy Transition Initiative, or HETI, as we call it, is an initiative out of the Greater Houston Partnership. The Greater Houston Partnership is the largest chamber in the Houston region. We represent 12 counties and about 950 member companies, which is a good cross-section of the talent and employment base here in Houston. So a few years ago, we decided to get really serious about the energy transition to an energy abundant and low carbon future. And to that end, we formed a coalition of companies. There are 22 major founding companies that represent all segments of the energy value chain here in Houston. So BP, Chevron, ExxonMobil, kind of your major integrated players, your utilities and power management companies, and then your petrochemicals industry as well, are all represented, as in addition to the renewables sector. So we are a coalition that's industry-led, but we also work very closely with our government partners, so the Port of Houston, the City of Houston, the county, and others, as well as leaders in academia and NGOs, to kind of build this energy abundant, lower carbon future. And we do that in a number of ways, but one that we'll talk about today is, of course, clean hydrogen, carbon capture, use and storage, and then broadly industry decarbonization. So I'm happy to kind of share more about that, but essentially we are the connective tissue that works with government and the private sector to kind of stitch together the efforts that are, stated and aligned in our city's climate action plan, and then our federal ambitions as a nation to decarbonize.
Thank you for that introduction, and to try and tie the particularities of the different cities and ports experiences to one another. You mentioned that sort of HEDI is this connective tissue for the city, for even for the United States, but it's also, there's a connective tissue there, I think, with other cities and other around the world, including, if I understand correctly, Rotterdam. That Houston and Rotterdam have either a formal or an informal agreement, at least a desire to work together to enable the creation of a global hydrogen economy. And I'm wondering if you might share any insights you would have about what that partnership looks like, and more broadly about how places like Houston are working with other cities and other, including but not limited to other port cities around the world about bringing this vision that we all have about a sort of a globally a decarbonized world into fruition.
Absolutely. So Rotterdam and Houston, recently held a royal visit here in Houston in September of last year. And they expressed the intent there to exchange the first green hydrogen molecules between their two international ports by 2026. So that's a great, exciting announcement. And now there's a quarterly kind of working group that's continuing that effort forward. But we also see that, export activity is already really happening here in Gulf Coast ports related to hydrogen. And, for example, the Port of Corpus Christi, which is just south of us, has signed an MOU with the Port of Rotterdam in early 2021 that outlines several shared objectives, including the development of innovative technologies such as hydrogen. So these types of arrangements, these MOUs, these international delegations are really going to, we think, pave the way for green hydrogen corridor creation to connect clean hydrogen supply in the Gulf Coast broadly with demand abroad for hydrogen products. So lots to be excited about there, not just limited to hydrogen, but I think we're going to see a lot of great announcements coming in the future.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for those insights. Very exciting stuff. So Bob, let me turn to you real quickly. So we've already heard this morning the word Aberdeen from our featured speaker. I personally, during the research over the past year that we've done, Aberdeen comes up frequently as a leader in this space. And so I think, you are the perfect person to talk to about how the port and the city of Aberdeen are, pushing a decarbonization agenda forward. And maybe if you could summarize for our viewers what Aberdeen is doing, especially given what we've heard today from three other cities and port cities around the world.
Of course, thank you, Peter. Firstly, thank you to yourself and the Atlantic Council for having me on the panel for today's really insightful session. And I have to say I'm very reassured in hearing some of the common themes from Rotterdam, from Valencia, and others, including from the keynote speaker Andres, who mentioned specifically Aberdeen and the relationship between Aberdeen and BP. I think by way of introduction and an overview on Aberdeen, Aberdeen has been an energy hub, particularly supporting the offshore sector for the last 50 years. And as such, it's built up a huge amount of expertise and become a city of innovators. The Port of Aberdeen has played a key role within that as a logistics hub and providing the connecting tissue, if you like to use the term already used today, between the wet and the dry end of the energy sector. And we currently support 12,000 jobs, and we make a contribution of about $2 billion every year to the local, regional, and indeed national economies. Energy transition is very much the big show in town at the moment. And we're not standing still. Whilst we've been the oldest, or we are the oldest business in the UK, been around for almost 900 years, we're looking to the future, and we're looking to see how we can play a key part in energy transition. And as part of that, we've built a £400 million, $500 million new harbour that you see on the screen behind me, to position ourselves to continue supporting the nation's efforts on energy transition. And just sort of touching on something that the keynote speaker said earlier on, the various strands that we're involved in Aberdeen include hydrogen, both from the production and the export of hydrogen, and that's a stated policy aim of the UK government. We're looking at carbon capture and storage, and we're looking at support to the offshore wind sector. And some of your viewers might know that the Scottish government recently issued licenses for offshore wind farms off the coast of the UK, which will see the installation of about 3,000 wind turbines, 70% of which will be within 100 kilometres of Aberdeen. So we're very, very well placed to support the offshore wind sector as that becomes a fundamental part of energy transition. Another theme that was mentioned earlier on, collaboration. We work in very, very close partnership with government and private sector entities in Aberdeen. We have the Energy Transition Zone, which will sit right next to our new harbour, and that's a private-public partnership that looks at attracting inward investment for energy transition. So we're very much becoming the port of choice here. We're having conversations with energy companies, with shipping companies, with technology centres to see how we can continue providing that support on energy transition. I'm very happy to elaborate further on our green strategy, perhaps as we go towards the end of the session. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Bob. And before we turn to Johan to get his thoughts on the Green Corridors project that he's working on, I guess one of the questions that I have, and I have my own answers, by the way, to this question, but I'd love to hear from our first two panelists in this session, maybe on your thoughts. But my strong impression of working in and around sort of cities for a number of years is that city governments, people who represent cities, and I would include people who are working in port authorities to be included in that definition, that cities are of course always competing with each other for advantage, right, in the global economy, because all cities, not just port cities, are, if you will, nodes in the global economy, and therefore trying to seek an advantage for purposes of attracting talent, for purposes of attracting investment, for market share, et cetera. But what's striking is that competition is viewed by cities in really positive sum terms, and we've heard that this morning in this conversation, which is that cities also look to one another to learn from one another and are highly collaborative. Is that impression accurate? Number one, I guess, is the first question to the two of you. And then second, why is that impression accurate if it is accurate? Why is it that cities are always reaching out to other cities for purposes of learning and collaboration and not necessarily for zero-sum competition? And I'm happy to ask that question of either or both of you.
Shall I kick off because I've still got my microphone on? If you hadn't,
yes, Bob. You're on, yes.
Great. I'd say you're absolutely right on both counts. On competition, there is competition for funding. There is finite funding, and one thing that I think no one will disagree on is the fact that certainly in the early stages of energy transition, decarbonization will cost. Because the technologies are still developing, the technologies are still emerging, and the scope for first mover advantage is quite limited at the moment. So we all look to government, we all look to the private sector for investment. So we're vying for a finite amount of capital that's out there. But having said that, the scale of what we are trying to achieve here towards net zero, and we at the Port of Aberdeen have stated our vision of achieving net zero by 2040. So that's ahead of both the Scottish government's and the UK government's targets. But the scale of what's needed is too much for a single entity, a single city, or a single port to do on its own. We certainly don't have the monopoly on the bright ideas. And there's lots of stuff that we've heard already today from other ports and cities around the world. We certainly don't have all the capacity that we need ourselves in order to provide what our government needs by way of support in, for example, offshore wind. So we are in active conversations with neighbouring ports and with ports further afield, who most of the time we see as competitors, but actually we're sitting down to discuss how we can collaborate, how we can come together to provide the best solutions for the developers of those wind farms and other renewable energy sources in order to achieve the right result, A, for the nation, and B, for humankind.
Thank you, Bob.
Go ahead.
Sophia, yes, please, Sophia. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this question.
Yeah, I was just going to say that I completely agree with Bob. We are all competitors, but we are also allies. I would say we are all struggling with the same kind of similar problems and challenges, and then we're international gateways, right? We're international port cities, so many of our customers are our competitors as well. So it's all part of one global system, I would say, and we're all working on kind of solving this decarbonization challenge together because we all have that challenge in our own systems.
All right, thank you so much, Sophia. And I want to now turn to Johan and Johan, ask you about I think really the fascinating work that you're doing. You're working on basically a green corridors project with a specific focus on Chile, and I'm wondering if you might explain to the viewers, you might briefly describe the project, and more broadly discuss how your work fits into a vision of how the world's ports can move us to a green hydrogen economy and a sustainable future.
Yeah, thank you, Peter, and thank you for inviting me to this panel here. So love to talk about what we're doing in Chile and the work we're doing there. Let me just spend just 1 minute just explaining what the center is. So although we carry the name Maersk in our name, we're not affiliated actually with the shipping line Maersk. So we're a research and development center, which is paid by a large donation, which was developed by the initial owner of Maersk, but not any longer related to the company. So we're more related to the Copenhagen Opera House than actually to the shipping line. So our research and development center is based on a number of employees, but then a number of strategic partners supporting all of our projects there. BP being one of them, Total Energy, Equinor, could be shipping lines like NYK, Hapag-Lloyd, could be Port of Gothenburg, it's the cargo owners, a lot of different strategic and knowledge partners and mission ambassadors, all connected to the center. So that's what we do, or who we are. What we're doing is really the mandate that we have from the foundation is that we're not allowed to do commercial competitive service. So if something was easy, then you could call, I don't know, who consultancy company in your area of the world and ask them to engage in the project. What we're doing is these first mover attempt. And as said before, I mean, there are probably not that many first mover advantages in this business right now here of developing the green transition. And maybe we're more likely to talk about the first mover disadvantages and how that cost gap, at least for the first couple of years, if not couple of decades, can be closed by government or other kinds of funding. So what we do in the center is we have one vision, and that's to decarbonize the global maritime industry by 2050 and drive that process. And given that many of the vessels, if not all of them, go through many of the ports, then the ports are, of course, very important for the work that we're doing. And we're doing work with Rotterdam, with Valencia, we're doing work with Singapore, we're doing work with a lot of ports around the planet. But as you said, Peter, we carried out a quite interesting study that last year and which we continued this year together with the ministries in Chile, so the Ministry of Energy, Ministry of Transportation, and Ministry of Foreign Affairs, who wanted to see how could they explore the very benign geographical setting with low-cost hydrogen in the future, both from solar and wind, and see how that fuel or that potential green fuel could actually be used in the maritime decarbonization. The size of Chile and the length of the coastline means that 95% of everything, of all transportation in Chile, happens on the seaway. So they're very keen to see how could that be done. So we did that study together with Chile and investigated, actually, I mean, touched base with 96 ports in and around Chile to find out where would be good places of actually deploying these green corridors. So when we talk about a green corridor, it's in essence, it's a commercial transportation of any kind of good or service between two ports. It could also be a number of ports in a network if it's a service string for a container line, and it could in principle also be within a port area. But what we're really after is to find those first projects where those alternative fuels. So we have heard today a lot of talk about green hydrogen, which is of course paramount in this, but we're also looking into the derivatives, so green methanol, green ammonia, blue ammonia for that matter, to test how these fuels can actually be used in the maritime industry. So I would say for a lot of the, at least personal transportation, maybe buses, Chile has 1,000 electrical buses. So there's a lot of direct electrification that could happen there and should take place wherever that could be done. But at a certain size of the engine or the vessel, then we need to go to alternative liquid fuels. And that's what we're testing in Chile. So we outlined together with the ministry 18 different corridors that could be seen as options for testing these the fuels in Chile. So it was crucial for Chile that the assessment was on their fuel developed in the country itself, and because of the lack of available sustainable CO2, the vast majority of the studies are on ammonia. So we both investigated the options of doing that in the large ports, San Antonio, Antofagasta, and all, many of these ports, more traditional ports where it was the port that generated the city. But what we have also seen in that area is that there are also ports or areas which do not necessarily have a large city or population around the port area, but are just very important industrial hubs. That can be the case in a country like Chile because of its vast size. So a port like Mejillones in northern Chile, there's only 15,000 people living in the area in total. But while we were there, we saw a number of container vessels coming in, a pure car truck carrier. Everything for the copper mining industry comes in through that port. So a very developed port area, but with a very limited hinterland city, so to say. And there's a very keen interest for these ports or these areas to become the bunkering hubs or the fueling hubs of the future, because they have the available space to actually investigate these options for alternative fuels. So yes, the traditional cities, ports like Rotterdam and Valencia, Aberdeen are important, but there are also the side note here that, I mean, can they actually handle all of those additional businesses that will be required in that green transition? And we see, as I said, in Chile, we have a similar study ongoing in both Australia and Morocco, where these new ports might actually develop.
Thank you, Johan, for that overview of your research. I think one of the things that I've heard this morning. Sorry, I'm in Washington, so I'm saying morning. I know it's morning for not everyone in the world, but it is for me. Is this question of how do we build all of these different systems? How do we invest in these systems? And all of it speaks really in the end to both experimentation as well as scaling of successful experiments. And I think we got that in one of the questions in the Q&A chat, where one of our viewers asked about basically how possible it is to switch cities to entire cities to entirely to renewable energy based electricity. So I guess that maybe it's a very big and difficult question to answer, but I think it is the right question to answer, which is, in your view, whether you're talking about the city that you're working on or any region that you've been working on, what are the prospects for the scaling of all of this work that you're doing, whether it's energy production, whether it's energy transmission, or any other dimension of this question about how we transition cities and port cities into truly decarbonized places, and therefore get the entire world to a decarbonized future? Happy to ask that question of any one of you or all three of you. And if you have a relatively quick answer, that would be wonderful. So I see a hand from Bob and I see a hand from Sophia, and I think I see a hand from Johan as well. So let me start with, maybe I saw the first hand was Bob. So Bob, why don't we turn to you first?
Thank you, Peter, and I will be very brief. I think Aberdeen is very well placed to be in the lead for decarbonization of shipping and also decarbonization of cities. And the reason I say that, in the case of shipping, I firmly believe, and I think it's a point that I think Johan has already made today, that it's the small ships on shorter journeys that will try out the new technologies and the new fuels, the new low or zero carbon fuels going forward. And the nature of the business that most of the ships do that come into Aberdeen is very much like that. They come into port, so they resupply, they go out for a week or 2 weeks, then come back and do the same again. So I think that operation lends itself to the region being in the lead for maritime decarbonisation. And the second point, which applies both to decarbonisation of shipping and to decarbonisation of cities, is the huge presence of energy companies in Aberdeen. So I won't list them because there's too many of them, but they've been here to a lesser or greater extent for the past 50 years. There are strategic partnerships, as you heard from the keynote speaker, between the likes of BP and Aberdeen City Council and so on. And the expertise that's been built over the last 50 years on in the energy sector, which is now turning its mind to energy transition, is, I think, a great force for good for the future. So I think we have all the ingredients here to play a key part, both in the maritime sense and also in the city space. Thank you.
Wonderful, thank you. So we have one optimistic answer from Bob. Sophia, I think I saw your hand up as well, if you'd like to maybe give us your thoughts.
So mine's also going to be optimistic, but Houston's home to, we're the energy capital of the world. We have a huge portion of the nation's share of refining capacity, petrochemicals. We have a very sophisticated industrial base here, but it's also a high emitting sector. So in some ways, the challenge almost becomes the solution. We have emissions here, which can be a great test bed for how we pilot, demonstrate, and scale up industry decarbonization practices. So with HEDI specifically, we have support from a group called the Mission Possible Partnership, as well as a grant from the Bezos Earth Fund. And we're defining the industrial decarbonization potential for the Houston region. And that includes baselining emissions, stakeholder engagement with industry and public sector partners to really benchmark the existing and planned efforts to decarbonize our industrial operations here in Houston.
Wonderful, thank you so much. And Johan, I'll give the last word to you if you want to take this.
Well, thanks, Peter. And I think just to give it a slightly different flavor than being 100% it's not that I don't want to be optimistic, but one of the comments might be that the renewable energy, we strongly believe that, the less transitions you have to put it through, the better it is. So if you can directly electrify anything, then that's better than converting it to hydrogen. It's better to use hydrogen than converting it to the next level because of the thermodynamics. You're going to lose energy every time. So the more we can directly electrify, that's good. And that's why we actually see several of our projects coming out of either one areas with, just like Sophia said, like Houston, with a huge industry within energy and within petrochemical, knowing that their business in that area, and then areas where there is actually a surplus of energy. And there are places in northern Chile or Morocco or Oman or Western Australia where we've got plenty of energy. So I think what we should aim for is that wherever we can use the renewable energy directly to the large cities and the ports for onshore power support and stuff like that, that's good. And then develop the fuel and find a good way of treating that so we can get the fuel produced where we got the surplus of energy, instead of necessarily also producing all of the alternative fuels in those areas of the cities and the ports, which could use the power directly.
Right, thank you, Johan. And thank you to our second panelists, to Bob, Sophia, and Johan for your remarks today. Very much appreciated. Unfortunately, we're at the time limit and we'll have to close this session. I'd like to thank everyone in the audience for tuning in, and especially, of course, to our panelists, the first session for participating, as well as to our keynote speaker for his remarks earlier today. And finally, I'd like to thank my colleagues here at the Atlantic Council, and specifically at the Global Energy Center, as well as at BP, in organizing this event. I'd like to thank a few people in particular for helping to put it together, including Joe Webster and Maya Sparkman, Christine Sue, Lizzie Brown, and Laura Macedo. And from BP, Katie Wallace, Corne Boot, Estrella Yara Galam, and Danielle Cohen. This discussion is available on the Atlantic Council website, YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter. Please share it with your colleagues. I hope everyone has a great rest of your day, and thanks again for joining us.